Hi, everyone. I'm happy to welcome you to our Forrester CX session today. My name is Todd Grossman. I am the CEO of the Americas of Talkwalker. And today we're thrilled to have Troy Janish here, who is Vice President, Director of the Social Intelligence Team at USBank, with us on virtual stage. How are you doing today, Troy?
Doing great.
Great to have you here. Let me tell you a little bit about Troy and give you a brief introduction. Troy leads the Social Intelligence Team at USBank, where he leverages social data to provide real-time insights towards business initiatives, marketing strategies, social engagement, and branding. And his team implemented and manages social monitoring, management, and benchmarking tools and strategies that supports the U.S. Bank in more than 3,000 local branches. Troy is also a board member of socialmedia.org and an adjunct professor at St. Catherine's University and the University of Wisconsin. And Troy, I understand that you also have a certificate or a license in bartending and mixology.
Well, I like to keep busy.
Very good. Well, before we start with the presentation, I would like to just give you a few words on Talkwalker. Talkwalker is the leading social listening and analytics company that empowers over 2,000 brands and agencies to optimize the impact of their communication efforts. Our company provides business with an easy-to-use platform to protect, measure, and promote their brands worldwide across all communication channels in 187 languages. And Troy, can you tell us a little bit about U.S. Bank?
Sure. Well, we've got thousands of branches, like you've got thousands of clients. We're the fifth largest bank. The four banks that are larger than us are quite a bit larger, and the banks that are smaller than us are quite a bit smaller. So we have a gap in between. So sometimes we are grouped in with the big banks, especially as people are talking about banking related to COVID and the current financial issues that are being discussed widely. And then sometimes we're considered a regional bank. And so we track the activities of both of those groups so that we can be an active member of both.
Very nice. And Troy, we have about 15 minutes for a bit of a discussion here. And the first thing is customer trust and satisfaction are critical to the success of any business, especially during times of crisis. As consumer expectations rise, your ability to meet them can make or break your brand. And I'd like to ask you, tell us how insights from social media listening have guided U.S. Bank's operations during the pandemic.
Well, it's interesting how things come full circle, because when I started working in social media analytics and listening more than 5 years ago, it was really all about just listening, and mostly with the intent to respond and provide customer service. And that's something we've been doing throughout. But more and more, as the social media channels have kind of closed up a lot of the marketing opportunities that are out there for brands, where we find the most value with social media channels and websites is extracting voice of customer data. So I've got a little graphic there that I'm sharing, and really we've got a strong customer experience team. We've been monitoring engagement, seeing how people are interacting with our brand, and we do the same solicitation that other brands do in terms of surveys and reviews and extracting testimonials. But I think the untapped area for a lot of companies, where we've got a bit of a jump start, I think, is in unsolicited feedback. So we don't know the answers to questions we're not asking to people who are not engaging directly with the brand. And that's where social media has been a really valuable part of the customer experience insights that we leverage on an ongoing basis. And I think, the example that we're going to use for the purpose of, today's discussion is COVID related. And on the previous slide, I just thought it'd be, worth noting that for when it comes to COVID, banks are in the center of everything, but we don't drive any of it. These aren't things that we've initiated, right? So it's a perfect example to talk about social listening, whether that's people getting their stimulus checks, unemployment checks, because we administer that in states, mortgage relief, which is something that a lot of people are worried about, and then the federal program. So banks, U.S. Bank and others are kind of thrown in administering a lot of programs that were unplanned for. And it's a great case study for social intelligence because it really kept us thinking ahead and moving quickly to make sure that we were providing a good customer experience. So thanks for going back one slide. And I thought what I could do is break down just a couple of interesting scenarios, because I think that a lot of brands are really comfortable using tools for social listenings about themselves. And I think what we've found is that there are lots of dimensions to any issue. And so when it comes to COVID, for example, I just show a couple of screenshots here, but what you'll see in the line there is that under COVID-19 reporting, we've got a lot of different reports. So we have one dashboard that's just about people talking about US Bank, but we have another one about that gathers insights talking to other banks, and then just banking in general, and then the whole idea of banking from home. And these examples really helped us improve the customer experience. So for example, you know, with the US Bank related mentions, we were able to learn from customers their expectations as it related to transitioning from you know, a local experience where they could go into a branch to one that was primarily online and also using drive-through. For top banks, you know, we were able to look at issues that were important, you know, things like disinfecting, you know, pneumatic tubes and all of the precautions, and banking in general, you know, just finding out from the good and bad experiences that people had elsewhere, how we were measuring from that. And so I think that the on-demand dashboards were just one of those pieces where it allowed the teams that were implementing each of those programs to jump in and say, you know, what are people saying today about us, about banks, about banking, that we can use to improve the customer experience. So those on-demand dashboards, while they contain a lot of information, they're usually like the second point of contact that people have. So my job, I think, in social intelligence as pulling together voice of customer is to find those examples that make them want to find answers. And that's where, on the next slide, I wanted to just provide a quick example of what we did in terms of daily updates. So these are daily updates that we used related to COVID-19 related stuff, but daily updates are things that, you know, are good from voice of customer for a number of topics, right? The George Floyd incidents that happened here in Minneapolis and other cities, there were daily updates for, and we've used this periodically. And, you know, sometimes as the volume lowers, they can be weekly updates. But the idea here is to give people a sense of essentially an executive summary of what's happening. And from this, you can't quite see it in the slide potentially, but they can click through the dashboard and explore those issues. But typically a daily update is just kind of two flavors. And the first flavor captured here is what are the interactions that are happening specifically with US Bank that we need to be aware of. And then the second slide, which is the next graphic I wanted to share, was how things are in the industry, right? Because we're the 5th largest bank, and so we aren't always the center of attention. And if there's an instance where a company like US Bank gets thousands of mentions in 48 hours, it can be a very concerning thing because that's not normal for us. So part of what we want to do is be able to put it in context for our executives, because we were getting a lot of negative mentions when related to some of the Paycheck Protection Program and other things, but it was often because we were just grouped together as one of the top 5 banks, and so we were able to provide some context. And then what it also allows us to do is get a sense of, you know, how is our sentiment and our voice of brand mentions different than peers. And one of the examples that was really highlighted here was that we were pretty even on the volume of conversation as we would expect in the marketplace. But it became clear that, you know, we were getting a higher volume of mentions and negative experiences from folks who were involved in unemployment benefits. And that's because we administer unemployment benefits in 15 states, but the call centers that we use weren't ready for the 10 times volume increase that was there. And so what we were able to do is leverage some of the incoming insights and give a heads up to the team on what the issues that people were having were and how they were going to resolve that and put it on their plate. And I think this is important because if we had only used those other 2 points of voice of customer, we'd have only heard from people who we asked, who reached out to us, or who had already reached us successfully. But the fact that the call centers were overrun and people had to wait for several hours and weren't getting the speed of service, they weren't part of the radar that would be available until you bring in the insights that come from the outside, that unsolicited conversation. And so that's a really good example of that. But you can see here that we kind of track different brands.
So Troy, it's great to see insights from the Talkwalker platform and you incorporating it into your slides, and you are an extremely excellent power user. In addition to closely monitoring brand mentions and the overall industry landscape, you mentioned unemployment. How else did you uncover customer experience blind spots and discover emerging trends? What do we have here?
Well, yeah, what I wanted to share was just an example of, a lot of times insights bubble up from those individual mentions, and that was an example in those other screens. But Talkwalker and there are other tools like Quid that have the ability to use machine learning and group together, topics that would otherwise wouldn't be visible. So you're able to drill from the top down. And so this is just a quick example of when you look at, all of the conversations related to unemployment, the problems that people were having are visible by different colors here. And we were able to drill down to find opportunities to help in those areas, as opposed to the bottom up, which we've, also done, which relies on you to look at all of the individual mentions and then kind of group them.
So what we see here is the bottom-up alerts that you were talking about?
Yeah, exactly. So here, and there's a graph that kind of shows that it's the spread of, were the issues they were having related to things that were in our control. They were on hold, their cards were being frozen, or were they issues that were part of those state-owned programs? Because again, where voice of customer insights from social intelligence is awesome is when you don't have full control. And so, we're implementing state programs, and the problems they're having could be related to what's happening at the state, even though they're directing that at us. And it allows us to identify those problems and provide both content and helpful tips for folks, and then a higher level of support when that's required.
Right. In the next slide here, we have relevant and engaging content. Can you talk a little bit about what we're seeing here in terms of the 4 different graphs?
Yeah, I'll do this really quickly, but basically one of the social insights that you have is what people care about. So the top 2 graphs, to the left, it shows different Reddit subreddits that are related to banking and how much activity is happening. So we know which type of content people are talking about, and if you look to the right, it breaks down to very detailed. So using a tool like Talkwalker, you can see what are the emerging conversations that are related to personal finance, so that when we're publishing content, it's not the same generic stuff that everyone else is doing. And then the graphs at the bottom just show the content mix of us versus competitors, and we can look at who's sharing what type of content, and then look at how the engagement is happening. So at a glance, we know how our approach of talking to customers online is resonating and how that compares to competitors. So social data is great for benchmarking how well you're providing relevant content.
Understood. So I know you've been looking at pre and post-COVID sentiment and themes, and it'd be great to understand a little bit of these changing times and this example that you have here to talk about this and show any themes that you uncovered as well.
Yeah, I think the other thing that social data is great for customer experience is anticipating when the rules change. And COVID-19, another great example of that, right? Student life is just an example where, if folks are going to school, there was a certain expectation and experience that has changed a lot. And if we go to the next slide, you can see that happening through data. So what you can see is down below is a graph that just shows sentiment, and the further to the right something is, the more positive it is. And basically what it says is, student life before COVID was hopeful. It was a great thing, and it was all about learning those adulting skills. But when you go to the next slide, you'll see that since COVID has happened, that same graph has changed, and now student life is all about fearful, right? It's it's a point of stress as opposed to hope. The environment has changed a lot, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and so proceeding with the same paradigm of pre-COVID in the way that you talk to students about, financial decisions or any product stuff is going to be different as a result. And this is just one example. We do a lot of trend analysis, and I think that, we feed that into the market research team at US Bank, and then they can create focus groups and surveys to see what does US Bank need to do to make its experience and its product more timely and relevant. So those were the slides I had to share.
Troy, thank you so much for all this insightful information. We have about 3 minutes left, and I have one last question for you, and that is for our listeners. They may want to know what steps should they take in terms of evaluating platforms, tools to work with. What were the things that were important to you?
Well, there are a couple of things that really are front and center for me. One of them is a robust Boolean language, right? So any of the listening tools, you need to pull everything in and do the filtering. And the tools that have powerful languages that allow you to get down to from 500,000 mentions to the 20,000 mentions that matter most. As much pre-processing as a tool can do, the better. So in an example like Talkwalker, you've got a really robust query language, and then you've also got machine learning, and those two pieces make it easier to go right to the insights. And I'd say that, one of the other things is the ability for a tool to integrate with your own platform. So this social data, because it's in high demand, is something that the customer experience team wants to provide in dashboards, so that it's so that the social feedback is right next to surveys and other sources of customer feedback. And so, leveraging things like the API, we can pull in that data, put it in a dashboard so that, if you're a bank manager, you see how customers have responded, you see social media mentions and the performance all in one spot. And so, we're breaking down those walls between what is social listening and what is, actionable information, and putting it right in front of people who can apply that to make the experience better.
Troy, I'm a follower of yours on Twitter. If people wanted to follow you on Twitter, can you give them your Twitter address?
Sure. My Twitter address is @socialmeteor, and that's METEOR.
That's wonderful. And Troy, I'd really like to thank you for your time, and for those in the audience who want to visit the Talkwalker booth and learn more information, by all means, we'd be happy to answer any other questions that you may have. Thank you all, and have a great day.